Andrew, I just don't understand. Everything seems to be falling apart for me lately. Business is slow, bills keep piling up, and no matter how hard I pray, things aren't changing.
Simon, let me ask you something. Have you been paying your tithe regularly?
My tithe?
Yes. The Bible says in Malachi 3:10, "Bring all the tithes into the storehouse, and see if I will not open the windows of heaven for you." Maybe that's why you're struggling, because you haven't been faithful in tithing.
I didn't know it was because of tithing. I mean, I give when I can, but sometimes things get tight, and I use the money for other needs.
That's exactly the problem. Tithing isn't about convenience, it's about obedience. When you withhold your tithe, you're shutting the door on God's blessings.
You really think so? But I've seen people who don't tithe, yet they're doing well financially.
Prosperity without God's blessing is like a house built on sand. It won't last. You might see them prospering now, but in the long run, what will it profit them?
I don't know, Andrew. This is heavy. I think I'll go see the pastor. Maybe he can pray for me and help me understand this better.
That's a good idea. But I already know what he'll say. You need to honor God with your tithe.
Let me go and see the pastor first. I need clarity. Ah, my tithe.
Welcome, Simon. It's good to see you. How are you?
Thank you, Pastor. Honestly, I'm not doing too well. That's why I came to see you.
I understand. What's been going on?
My business has been struggling for months. Sales are down, debts are piling up, and no matter how hard I try, things just aren't improving. It's been frustrating.
That sounds difficult. Have you been praying about it?
I have. But yesterday, I was talking to Andrew, and he told me that my struggles are happening because I haven't been paying my tithe regularly. He said that's why God hasn't been blessing me. I started feeling guilty, and I didn't know what to think. So I decided to visit you for clarity. Is tithing really the reason I'm struggling?
Simon, I'm glad you came. There's something you need to know, a dark truth about tithing that many churches never want you to hear.
A dark truth? What do you mean?
It's preached in almost every church. Give 10% to God, and He will bless you beyond measure. But what if I told you that there's a dark truth about tithing that many churches never want you to know? 1. Tithing was never about money. Tithing has become one of the most preached topics in modern churches, often tied to financial blessings and curses. You've probably heard it before. If you don't tithe, you're robbing God. Malachi 3:8. But here's a question most people never ask. Was tithing ever about money in the first place? The truth is, biblical tithing was never about cash. In the Old Testament, tithing was always agricultural, crops, livestock, and produce. Leviticus 27:30. Why? Because Israel was an agricultural society, and God commanded the Israelites to give a portion of their harvest to support the Levites. The Levites were the priestly tribe who had no inheritance of land like the other tribes. Numbers 18:21. Their survival depended on these tithes, because they were full-time temple workers. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Tithing was never required from everyone. Only those who grew crops or raised animals were commanded to tithe. If you were a carpenter, fisherman, or blacksmith, you didn't owe a tithe, because tithing was tied to the land. So why do churches today teach that everyone must give 10% of their income, as if that was the original command? The shift from agricultural tithes to monetary giving didn't happen in the Bible. It happened later in history, as churches became institutionalized and needed a steady stream of income to sustain themselves. Instead of depending on free will offerings, some leaders repurposed the Old Testament tithe as a financial requirement, even though Jesus and the apostles never commanded Christians to tithe money. So, the next time you hear a preacher say, "You owe God 10% of your salary, or you'll be cursed," ask yourself, is that really what the Bible teaches? Or is it a man-made system designed to fund modern church structures? The truth might surprise you. 2. Tithing won't automatically make you wealthy. For years, churches have preached a simple yet powerful message: if you tithe faithfully, God will bless you financially. It sounds like a divine investment plan. Give 10% of your income, and watch as heaven pours out unimaginable wealth. But here's a reality check. If tithing automatically made people rich, every tither would be a millionaire by now. So why do so many faithful givers still struggle financially? The idea that tithing leads to prosperity is often based on Malachi 3:10, where God says, "Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, and see if I will not open the windows of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it." But let's pause for a moment. Was this a blanket promise to all believers, or was God speaking to a specific group of people? In context, this passage was addressed to the Israelites, who had been neglecting their covenant responsibilities. It was not a universal guarantee that handing over 10% of your paycheck would make you rich overnight. The truth is, wealth is built through financial wisdom, hard work, investment, and stewardship, not just through tithing. If you give 10% of your income, but mismanage the remaining 90%, live beyond your means, or lack financial literacy, no amount of tithing will make you rich. God is not a slot machine where you insert money and expect instant jackpots. Let's also consider this. If financial prosperity was solely tied to tithing, why are there so many wealthy people who don't tithe at all? Many successful business owners, investors, and entrepreneurs have built wealth through smart financial practices, not through religious giving. Meanwhile, some of the most devoted tithers remain in poverty, waiting for a financial breakthrough that never comes. Now, does this mean tithing is useless? Not necessarily. Giving can be a powerful act of faith, gratitude, and generosity. It can support churches, help the needy, and fund kingdom work. But the problem comes when people are taught to rely on tithing as a financial strategy rather than learning sound financial principles. Some churches take this even further by using fear tactics, saying if you stop tithing, God will curse your finances. But God is not a divine debt collector waiting to punish those who fail to pay their spiritual taxes. Instead of pressuring people into giving with the expectation of getting rich, churches should be teaching biblical stewardship, financial planning, and wealth-building strategies that actually work. At the end of the day, financial success is not a product of tithing alone. It comes from making wise decisions, developing skills, creating opportunities, and being a good steward of what God has already given you. So before you empty your wallet expecting heaven to rain down dollar bills, ask yourself, is my financial breakthrough waiting in my tithe, or in the wisdom and work I put into my life? The answer might surprise you. 3. Many churches use fear to manipulate you. Many churches have mastered a dangerous tactic, using fear to manipulate people into giving. They don't just encourage generosity. They attach it to threats of curses, financial ruin, and even divine punishment. Ever heard a pastor say, if you don't tithe, you're robbing God, and He will close the heavens over your life? Or maybe something like, failing to give will allow the devil to attack your finances, your health, and your family? These kinds of statements are designed to control believers through fear rather than inspire true generosity. Instead of teaching financial wisdom and trusting God's provision, many churches pressure people into giving out of guilt and anxiety. One of the most misused scriptures is Malachi 3:8-10, where God tells Israel, "You are under a curse, because you are robbing me." This verse is often preached to convince people that if they don't tithe, God will personally bring suffering into their lives. But here's the truth most churches won't tell you. Malachi was written to the Israelites under the Old Covenant, not the Christians under grace. In the New Testament, Jesus redeemed us from the curse of the law, Galatians 3:13. That means no Christian is under a curse for not tithing. Yet, despite this, some pastors still use fear-driven tactics to secure their income. Instead of relying on honest, willing giving, they create an atmosphere of fear, making believers feel obligated to pay God to avoid suffering. The biggest lie that fear-based giving promotes is that God operates like a debt collector, demanding payment before He blesses you. But think about it. Did Jesus ever tell His disciples to tithe so they could be financially secure? Did Paul or any apostle ever teach that skipping tithing would bring a curse? No. Instead, they taught cheerful, voluntary giving, 2 Corinthians 9:7, where generosity was about love, not obligation. If you've ever given out of fear, thinking that skipping tithing would cause your finances to collapse, you've been manipulated. True giving comes from a place of gratitude and faith, not fear and coercion. So, the next time you hear a pastor say, if you don't tithe, bad things will happen to you, ask yourself, is this the voice of God, or is it a system designed to control people through fear? Because one thing is certain, God does not manipulate His children. He blesses those who give from a willing heart, not from fear of punishment.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
4. Your pastor might be benefiting more than you think. Have you ever wondered why some pastors live in luxury while many of their church members struggle to pay rent? The uncomfortable truth is that your pastor might be benefiting from tithing more than you think. Many churches push the idea that tithing is a direct path to financial blessings. But if that were true, shouldn't the biggest tithers be the richest people in the church? Instead, what we often see is a financial gap. The pastor flourishes while the congregation barely gets by. The question is, where does all that tithe money go? In some cases, churches operate more like businesses than places of worship. The pastor gets a hefty salary, drives luxury cars, lives in a mansion, and sometimes even owns private jets, all funded by the faithful tithes of struggling members. Meanwhile, those same members are told that their breakthrough is coming soon if they just keep giving. But when does soon actually come? Here's the part many churches won't tell you. Tithing was originally meant to support the Levites, who had no land to farm and no other source of income. But today, most pastors have multiple streams of income, yet they still demand tithes from people living paycheck to paycheck. Now, let's be fair. There are genuine pastors who use tithes responsibly to support church operations, help the needy, and spread the gospel. But there are also those who have turned it into a spiritual tax system, where members are made to feel guilty if they don't give. 5. The New Testament never commands Christians to tithe. For many Christians, tithing is taught as a non-negotiable duty, a spiritual law that must be followed to remain in God's favor. Pastors often quote Malachi 3:10, warning that if you don't tithe, you are robbing God and closing the doors to His blessings. But here's something most churches never tell you. The New Testament never commands Christians to tithe. Not once. In the Old Testament, tithing was an agricultural system where Israelites gave 10% of their crops, livestock, and produce to support the Levites, the priests who had no inheritance of land. Leviticus 27:30, Numbers 18:21. It was a tax system for Israel's theocratic government, not a universal rule for all believers. When Jesus came, He fulfilled the law, Matthew 5:17, and established a new covenant based on faith and grace, not legalistic requirements. That's why you never see the apostles commanding Christians to tithe in the New Testament. They never told new believers, make sure to give 10% of your money to the church, or God won't bless you. Instead, the New Testament emphasizes cheerful, voluntary giving rather than a fixed percentage. Some argue that Jesus mentioned tithing in Matthew 23:23, where He rebuked the Pharisees, saying, "You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin. But you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness." But here's the key. Jesus was speaking to Jewish leaders who were still under the Old Covenant at that time. He was not instituting a tithing law for Christians. He was exposing their hypocrisy. After Jesus' death and resurrection, the apostles never commanded Gentile believers to tithe. When the early church gathered, they gave freely according to their ability. Acts 2:44-45, 2 Corinthians 9:7. Paul explicitly taught that giving should be from the heart, not under compulsion, which is the opposite of the fear-based tithing teachings many churches push today. If the New Testament doesn't command tithing, why is it so heavily preached in many churches? The answer is simple: money. Churches require financial support to function, and rather than trusting members to give freely, many leaders enforce Old Testament tithing as a financial system to ensure steady income. Some even go as far as to claim that if you don't tithe, you are cursed, even though the Bible says Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, Galatians 3:13. There's a difference between giving to support God's work and being told that you owe God the mandatory 10% tax. The New Testament teaches generous, willing giving, not giving out of guilt, fear, or manipulation. The real biblical principle for Christians is generosity, not tithing. If you want to give 10%, that's great. If you want to give more or less, that's fine too, as long as it comes from your heart and not from fear of being cursed. The key is to give cheerfully and wisely, supporting ministries and people in need, rather than blindly following a law that was never meant for New Testament believers. So, the next time someone tells you, you must tithe, or God won't bless you, ask them, where in the New Testament is tithing commanded for Christians? Chances are, they won't have an answer.
Wow. So all this time, I've been thinking that God is withholding blessings from me because I didn't pay a certain percentage of my income.
Exactly. God is not a business partner demanding a contract payment. He blesses us based on faith, stewardship, and obedience, not because we gave a fixed amount of money.
This is eye-opening. Andrew made me feel like I was cursed for not tithing, but now I see that God isn't punishing me. He wants me to trust Him completely, not just follow a rule.
That's right. When we give, we should do it from love, not out of fear. God honors a cheerful giver, not a fearful one.
Thank you. This changes everything. I feel a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. I now understand that giving is important, but it should come from a place of joy, not guilt.
Amen. Now you understand the truth. God bless you.
Thank you, Pastor. God bless you too.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.